Welcome to Understanding the Unhoused. My name is Joshua. Through a series of interviews with the unhoused community and those working to help the unhoused community, my intention is to increase the awareness of and empathy for this group. They are a misunderstood group, and my hope is by hearing their stories directly, hearing exactly what it's like day to day to be unhoused in this country, you will recognize the humanity in them and do whatever you can to make their lives a little easier. Before I start, I would like to send some very large props out to my girlfriend, Wendy, who has encouraged me through the entire process of getting this podcast started and has helped me on my first series of interviews. She has been nothing but a rock for me through this, and I could not thank her enough. Okay, enough ado. I met Nathaniel while on a walk in the neighborhood Wendy lives in San Francisco, which is a neighborhood that doesn't generally have a lot of unhoused individuals in it. So I was a bit surprised to see someone sitting there with a sign that said, "Please help." So I took that prompt and I got some water and some snacks and brought it to him, and we got to talking. He has some interesting perspectives on homelessness in general and in San Francisco in particular. So I asked him if he wanted to be interviewed, and the results followed. Please know the interview has a bit of a hard stop because I was interrupted while doing the interview, and because I conduct the interviews on my phone, I unfortunately was not able to ask any final questions, so it's got a bit of a hard stop. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoy. So can you tell me the circumstances as best you can that led you to being unhoused?
What led me to be unhoused was I dropped out of grad school actually about 10 years ago. I felt very cloistered and in the East Coast. I was kind of making a few wrong decisions. I didn't really know how to keep up with a lot of my own appearances, and I felt like I was not handling a lot of things that I had focused myself to succeed around. And so I kind of vacated a lot of that responsibility, and I kind of wanted to just focus on life, not so rendered by the narrative of college. And college was too much of a pressure cooker. But I did end up not with a lot of resource, because this was around the financial crisis. Times were tough, but I was always someone always told me that coming to the West Coast, there's a lot more resources, and so I did. And I at the time I had gone through a few nonprofits here, and I was a little younger, so I accessed trailers, some transitional age. Funding for indigent youth, and then I got a housing voucher after about 5 years living in an SRO, and then I moved into an apartment over in North Beach. Currently, I have a circumstance now that kind of put me at odds with it, but I think times right now are a little bit different, and so sometimes I'm not sure if you noticed sort of the architecture of the city looks. There's a lot of changing dynamics. I think that one thing is most important to keep in mind is I don't think we're allowed to be indoors all day anymore like the city used to be. I think we get chased out of it sometimes, and I know it's an impossible type of observation, but I do think that we get driven a little in this sort of new paradigm in the last couple years. I don't know how to describe it though. I know it sounds a little conspiratorial, and I'm not trying to sort of indicate anything of that nature. I just think that there's a changing climate in the world, and we're also I think testing out a lot of new technologies. I think that we are noticed a lot more as people who live indoors. I'm normally like a hermit, and I normally am just someone who's just agoraphobic and likes living just entirely in my space. But I do think that there's an element that kind of has to like push us out every like 5 or 6 hours, and it's like we get like we get sort of like itchy feet. I don't know. It sounds kind of a little kooky to say. I don't want to sort of indulge this sort of premise too deeply. Another purpose to look into though is like the COVID era. I think made our population density noticeably less. That is one thing that is hard to reconcile with sometimes, because we did lose a significant amount of people in the world, and with that comes a hard sort of mentality to sit and reconcile with, because
do you think people became less empathetic during the COVID, the worst of the COVID eras?
You mean? No, I think the country, was incredibly empathetic. Do you remember the first stimulus check, during the Bush era, and that was like $600? Like my family went through such a Plantagenous walk about it, and lit a candle. We were waiting for it for a year. In fact, we had 2 stimulus checks for $1,300 and a year.
Yeah.
I just, it's amazing the level of efficacy that this country showed. I'm grateful to a lot of our political leaders for doing that. I didn't access any of the unemployment. Anyway, it's neither here nor there, but I think we were remarkably empathetic. I was also living in San Francisco, though. I think this city is...
Very good point.
Yeah, it does have a good civic efficacy to it.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of that, how has the city treated you since you've been unhoused?
I've really grown to like the city. Partly just because I'm from the East Coast, so I don't really know a lot of people in West, so I like kind of being a bit of a loner. I do find that the place has the right sort of political activism. I think is attractive. I grew up around a much more conservative undertone in life.
Sure.
And so it's what really sort of drove me to want to kind of live in an environment where I felt secure about the politics of the place being very democratic, because I just didn't want to have to always live in a type of stress of every election that the state was a bellwether, and you always had to concern yourself. Every independent voter, do you remember 20 years ago when it was just 5% of the population were the kingmakers, and we were only just concerned with people who voted purely undecided or
mm-hmm.
something. I'm glad that we're outside of a sort of mentality of it. It's still there, but the sense of its grandeur is not so impressed upon.
So what would you say the most useful thing you've been given while being unhoused?
I definitely will say that the city is much more active about getting people housed within its own housing stock, and in different dimensions of it. But one thing you have to understand is if you put yourself into a need-based sort of structure, you really have to understand how that sort of it anchors you to that for a long time. And it's not like you can't the degree to which the things that you sort of rely on in life become markedly different is the need to kind of have an expectation about your place not being you have to announce your guests. I found it a little bit odd that getting used to the single room occupancy culture, because I didn't know it was still tied to a hotel, but it felt very sort of red tape, but it is one of these aspects that is important to notice, given the fact that it is to be able to live there is comparable to having an apartment and you're only paying 30% of your income, and is a lot of checking in. And so knowing that you access social services and that you show a degree of respect for the fact that, you know, when you access that, you're expected to kind of maintain with that property manager. It's community housing partnership, Tenderloin, or this. What's the Todd? There's TNDC and then there's Toddco. Yeah, community housing partnership, and then the Episcopalians have Catholic charity. Yeah, and then Mercy Housing too.
What do you think the best treatment you've gotten from any of those agencies?
I think community housing partnership. They concern themselves largely with I think going an extra measure about learning what your needs are, and they do it in a very sort of feline way, but they figure out, you know, what kind of goals you have, and then they really sort of leave sort of a lot of just useful information about how to like access maybe college. And I got a paralegal certificate.
Okay.
Around 2018. But I was able to go to community college for very affordable. Yeah, but unfortunately, life circumstances changed a little bit. I was hoping to go into that for a little while, but it was still just enriching to be able to do. And community college here, and all of the UCs. I mean, if I really grew up here, I really wish I had the insight about knowing how much of a wealth of resources the public universities offer students here. I think my life, had I not been so predispositioned to an idea about going to private like college, looking at financial aid here, like people are actually able to sort of put some of that money towards their own, like, living situation, things of that nature. So being able to cover a large amount of your needs, like, without having to sort of just live within a tight matrices. I would have really liked to have thought about that, but the truth of the matter is, I'm well out of it now. But college will always forever have like put me into such like the financial situation I'm in. One aspect of my life, very distant with my family, and I used to be close.
I was going to ask you about family. Like, are they near here? Or are they still on the East Coast? Or?
They're back east.
Okay.
My father, who's now retired, but he has a consulting business, and then he also has he owned about 8 restaurants in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's tough because it's a very personal dynamic.
That's fine.
But it's just a culture difference. He's in a marriage with a very someone he really cares about. They met while I was in college, and so their nature as a couple is somewhat like sort of like it's like a second sort of engagement within the idea of their own family focus, but they're a little distant from. Sometimes they don't like to admit that they just don't want to like make the effort of sort of having a relationship. They'll sort of blame. There's certain lifestyle choices that I have or make, but that I don't confront them about in life. But they'll isolate them as if it is something that I did to alienate them or something. Yeah, but that's the long and the short of it. I just took it upon myself to kind of seek out a little plot of land. I didn't want to have to worry them too much, but I did fall out of like my class in a way. As ugly as that kind of sounds to say, like it's. Like I have a rougher disposition. There's a little bit of arrogance to some of the ways things look, but I certainly, I grew up very middle class, but like the way that my family looks at like living in a Section 8 housing, absolutely, like it just, I don't know, they think it's pitiful or something.
From what you've experienced, what is the most inaccurate perception people have of people that are on house?
I don't know, because this city is a gem, and I have to tell you, it's unlike other places. So,
Okay.
you become sort of starched within a lot of attitudes about housing, living in the foreground of a lot of premises and assumptions about creating a healthier ecosystem. I do know though that the Bay Area talks about this because it is worried about it largely not having a real estate focused market in general, and it puts a great deal of emphasis on our stock by allowing people to at least either enter into a lease, or they can go through a continuum of care. There's a lot of different sort of type of leasing structures, and that can sort of empower people who may not have a leasing history. And being a New Yorker, one of the hardest things is getting an apartment, and I never thought of Section 8 as something I could access. And that's why so it's able to offer jobs and things to the homeless, as well as to work within these. Yeah.
So you're saying that the perception of the unhoused out here is more elevated than elsewhere, that from your experience?
People here, I think, sometimes take for granted the ability to get a house. Like during the COVID crisis, I was amazed at how much people were being put into emergency hotel, not the SROs, just the SROs, but some of the luxury, like the Whitcomb. And I was surprised that the city really, did a latchkey type of thing. Obviously, you went through the paperwork. I do think that it drives an incentive of a larger ecosystem of people who do come through San Francisco in some ways. I do think that that's happening right now a little.
Yeah.
Is that I do think that there is a sort of larger organ of West Coast, like Washington to Arizona, that's coming here to sort of who took advantage of some of the hotel opportunity. Who wouldn't? But but it's amazing that that was something that was made available, and I think our mayor really did sort of a brave thing by putting people into a safe circumstance, instead of watching the city sort of swell and see Tent City kind of come up. Even though we did have a compound of tents, at least it was monitored by the city.
So, in your experience, what is the greatest benefit, if there is one, and the greatest drawback of being on the streets?
It is hard to describe. One of the greatest advantages, being able to live in a place where the climate is 65 degrees and breezy. It is an expectation that makes it very nice, and I've grown to have this sort of alopecia skin living here. It goes up 3 degrees and I'll feel it immensely. Wintertime, I can't even imagine what it feels like anymore. I like being able to be someone who can sort of live in domestic cat outside of a hospital or something. But I also I have to say I don't like the feeling of not knowing who my neighbors are. Sometimes there's a large amount of turnover, and especially in the SRO system. So sometimes it's a little unnerving because there's a whole quadrant of people who are about the traffic of interaction that understand just times a day to be out, and they can sort of hustle people for money, understanding just being able to just be a person of their own witness on the street. I don't know, it's a real kind of side to some people that if a car is stalled there for 3 hours, they can tip someone off for $5 or I used to live by a police station, that's why.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so there's some just really savvy types there who would just know how to make money off of just silly little tips.
What would you say the greatest drawback is to being out here?
There is renewed sort of sense of intimidation around the premise of being threatened about being a missing person. Okay. It's hard to describe. Mm-hmm. My family does this thing with me, which I really resent, and I can't tell you, I find it so offensive, it's not even funny. But they, once a year, will call and file a missing persons report to sort of impress upon a relationship that we don't have. And I think to sort of infer, for their tax purposes, I'm not trying to be too critical of it, but I do think it is about a power of attorney, and it's a lot of sort of weaselly type of, control-oriented distortions, but it puts me in a sort of a quagmire if I ever sort of mess up slightly, and if I maybe am stopped by a cop. Sometimes the cops would show up with this type of after-school special kind of attitude, saying about where are you? There's a missing person, and I'd have to go and get fingerprinted and go on station. It's so not. I can't even tell you how little of it. A delight that is, and it's sometimes just, I think, an infatuation with
control. Do you think it's control?
Yeah, well, it's also just have family kind of pretend as if, or give you a sense of the equator of their relationship still being.
Maybe it's just to know where you are.
Well, no, but then when you reach out to them, and then they're not actually there.
Okay.
And seeing it as the kind of, I don't know. I'm being a little, I think, unfair in some regards, but mostly just because these are my
your viewpoint.
It's my elders. I resent largely thinking about family after a while because it keeps you in such a juvenile place.
Hi again. Thanks for listening. If you have any interest in contributing an interview with a member of the unhoused community or a community worker working with the unhoused community to get their stories and increase the awareness of and empathy for the unhoused, please go visit our website at understandingtheunhoused.org. Click on the contact button, and we will get back to you as soon as possible, set something up, and get things moving. I hope after listening to this episode, you will have a little more patience, a little more empathy, and a little better understanding of the unhoused.